Hello and welcome to part 1 in a new series that explores my approach to writing harmony in music. Whether you're writing cinematic, classical, jazz, electronic, or really anything else, my hope is that this series of videos will help you to understand musical harmony more clearly, as well as to provide insight into my process of composing harmonies and developing compositions with harmony. In these videos, I'll be taking a different approach than, say, to an academic theory or harmony textbook. Most of those books focus on tonal harmony, starting with the classical era and progressing through the 19th century, covering things like diatonicism, functional tonal harmony, chromaticism, and eventually maybe a bit on atonal or 12-tone music. If you're interested in learning more about those topics, there are tons of resources, even just on YouTube. There are definitely some benefits to learning harmony with this sort of systematic approach based on the Western classical tradition. But with that approach, it's easy to get bogged down by rules and what not to do. I'm purposefully structuring this series of videos a bit differently, less about rules and more about creativity. I'll keep each of these videos fairly short and concise, but like most of my videos, I'll have quite a bit of detail and information in each one. For each of these videos, I'll create a follow-up video with more examples and even more discussion on each topic that will be available on my Patreon page. For just $5 a month, you'll get access to all of these videos along with additional materials. So with all of that said, in this first video, I'll be looking at the concept of implied harmony. Let's dive right into an example. Here I have a 4-measure melodic idea without accompaniment. Without any context, most of you will hear these 4 measures and assume a tonal key area of C major. Why is that? Well, because the melody implies harmony, or in this case, it implies a series of chords that collectively make up the harmonic content. Our ears are so attuned to major and minor chords and ingrained in Western tonal harmony that when we hear the notes C, E, and G in succession like this, we automatically hear a C major chord, even though the pitches are placed horizontally one after the other instead of vertically, and even though there aren't any instruments playing chords underneath the melody. Obviously, the context matters, so by only playing you these 4 measures, our ears can only use the information given to make subconscious decisions about the music. For instance, the fact that this passage starts with the pitches of the C major triad, so it's the first thing we hear, it influences our perception of its harmonic significance within the overall passage. In fact, upon hearing this first measure, which contains only these 3 pitches, our ears would likely hear measure 2 with the same harmonic context of C major, because there isn't really anything in measure 2 that would suggest otherwise. Yes, there's this F right here, but it's positioned on an unstressed moment in the metric scheme, and it's passing between 2 notes that are part of the C major chord. So there's not enough of something new in this measure to make our ears think that we've abandoned C major. That changes in measure 3, of course. The notes clearly outline a new chord with an A flat, an F, and a C. Sounds like an F minor chord. Or after hearing this D, with hindsight you might call it an F minor add 6 or a D minor 7 flat 5. I'm not going to get into chord labeling just yet, but the point is, without sustaining harmonies underneath, our ears are constantly listening for new information to try and make decisions about what's happening. And our ears have been influenced by all of the music we've ever heard to make those decisions, even on a subconscious level. And in measure 4, we hear the notes E and G again. These pitches aren't a part of the previous chord, so chances are we've shifted harmonies at the start of this measure. And for several reasons, including the fact that the melody reaches a climactic high point, as well as the harmonic context we've already established in measures 1 and 2, and the fact that E and G are part of the C major triad, all indicate to our ears that this is a return to C major. Our ears are used to this kind of progression, from the tonic chord or home key area, shifting to some sort of tension or conflict chord, in this case a subdominant chord, and back to the tonic. We learn by experience and repetition, and even without all of the details, we make assumptions, and they're usually pretty accurate. So in that example, you saw how the melody implied a harmonic context through pitch collection, metric context, and even phrase structure. That example was particularly easy to hear the chords. Most melodic ideas won't be quite as obvious. Let's look at another one. Here I have a 2-measure idea in 4/4 time that opens with a 5th interval from G to D. Anytime we hear a 5th interval at the start of a melody, our intuition tells us that the implied harmony is some sort of chord based on the root of that 5th, in this case G, perhaps either G major or G minor. Looking ahead, neither the major nor minor third appears at all, so there's really no way to determine a major or minor sonority. Unlike the last example where all the pitches of the triad were clearly laid out, here we have some ambiguity, which can be a very powerful compositional device. More on that in a bit. There are many ways to divide these 2 measures, and this brings us to an important discussion on harmonic pacing. How many harmonic changes does this 2-measure phrase imply? It's not entirely clear. You could certainly just have one harmony sustained throughout, perhaps just using these 3 pitches, G, D, and C, as they seem to be metrically stressed. You could form a sus4 chord that would work for the entire 2 measures. I could also increase the harmonic pacing either at regular intervals, like every 2 beats, or at irregular intervals, like every beat 1 and beat 4. If changing every 2 beats, I can look to see if the melody is implying any type of harmonic change in beat 3. Here we see a minor third interval from D to F. That's potentially implying a shift from a G sonority in beats 1 and 2 to a D minor sonority in beats 3 and 4. That works for measure 1, but look what happens in measure 2. Instead of a D to F interval, beat 3 features a D to G interval. That implies a G sonority once again. Beat 4 features that D to F interval, so it might make sense to wait until beat 4 in measure 2 to make the harmonic change. So does the shift to D minor occur in beat 3 in measure 1, and then beat 4 in measure 2? There's nothing wrong about having irregular harmonic pacing like this, but it might sound more musical if I change to the D sonority in beat 4 in both cases. It would establish a more regular harmonic pacing, and the beat 4 harmonic change in the first measure works fine. In those examples, I didn't commit to G major or G minor, I just used the root and 5th. Since there's nothing in the melody implying G minor versus G major, you have more freedom to experiment with both options, or just leave it open-ended. I'll look at one more example. This is a slightly longer melody, and through the combination of metric stress, pitch, melodic contour, and phrase structure, it implies certain harmonies. The first clues are the starting and ending gestures. It starts with a clear emphasis of A minor because of the A to C interval, as well as the presence of the leading tone G sharp. The ending also ends with the note A, and it's a clear exclamatory moment establishing this pitch as the tonic. When I say tonic, I don't necessarily mean you have to follow all the rules of tonal harmony, but even in non-functional tonal harmonic languages, there can be a home key area that follows a lot of the same patterns as functional tonal harmony. So we've established a tonic key area of A minor, and knowing the rules of tonal harmony, we can make assumptions about certain moments throughout these 4 measures. For instance, the 2nd and 7th scale degrees imply some sort of dominant harmony, whether it be a 5 chord or a leading tone diminished chord. Later on, the chromatic altering of this D to D sharp implies perhaps a secondary dominant function, most likely 5 of 5 in this case. If those words mean nothing to you, don't worry for now. I'll be talking about secondary dominant chords in a later video. So with all of these assumptions, you may end up with a harmonic progression that looks something like this. when you're composing a piece, you may want to present a melody several times, and you may want to vary the harmonies with each occurrence. It can be especially effective if you create a sense of transformation in your harmonic progression over the course of a piece. In other words, you may want to think about how the relationship between melody and harmony develops over time. Using this melody, for example, I know what harmonies are implied, but I also know that art and music can be really interesting if you don't always reveal what's expected, at least not right away. So with that in mind, I might choose to first present this melody with very minimal harmonic change. In fact, I could even decide to just use a pedal A over the entire first statement of this melody. Notice that by not revealing the full implied harmony, we create a sense of anticipation and an expectation for something to come, which is a major part of musical form, and in this case, harmonic form. Instead of just an A pedal note, I'll use an interval, A to C, in the harmonic background. Even when the melody moves away from the A minor sonority, I'll stick to this A to C minor third accompaniment, which creates some interesting intervals, some might say dissonant, between melody and harmony. So in this version, I'm revealing a bit more about the harmonic context, but I'm sticking to a static harmony. Now I'll repeat the melody and add chord changes. Because we've heard the melody once already, I want to present something new, and the suspense of not changing the harmony at all in the first instance adds to the intensity and sense of anticipation. It makes the eventual harmonic changes all the more effective. I'll play both statements of the melody and harmony back to back. So being able to identify what harmonies are implied in a melody is a very useful thing. And then when composing a piece with melodies and harmonies, you don't always want to reveal what's expected right away. The concept of harmonic form is a really fascinating one and a topic that I'll certainly be looking into more in this series. So I hope you've enjoyed this first video in my new series on harmony. There's already a supplemental video on my Patreon page that goes into more detail and examines a few more examples having to do with implied harmony. So check that out if you're interested. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.